This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. Those moments when heaven and earth collide and the miraculous happens and God reveals that he's right here, right now. I am your host, Trapper Jack.
Then there was a gunshot. Back window was blown out and the headrest had the bullets in it, but it wasn't my headrest.
Oh, that's a interesting show tease for an episode that's called What's a Nice Girl Like You? ... But we'll file that away for just a moment here and ask you the question, how'd you find the podcast? It's my favorite thing to ask people. How did you find the podcast? The answers obviously are varied, but in this episode, I have 3 women, and all of them found the podcast the exact same way.
I like the paranormal, so...
The paranormal. In fact, I was on Jim Harold's Paranormal podcast a few weeks back, and it brought us a lot of new listeners. And you go, paranormal, really? Bigfoot, UFOs, all that. What's the connection? You'll hear the connection with these 3 women. Something else I've mentioned, too, in these Touched by Heaven moments, I don't care which episode you listen to, you hear nice people. Churchgoers, non-churchgoers, just nice people. And you'll hear it in these 3 women as well. That's why the episode is called What's a Nice Girl Like You? Doing in a podcast like this?
Hello?
Sue, it's Trapper. How are you?
Hi, Trapper.
This is Sue Baker. Nice? Absolutely.
I live in Gallatin, Tennessee.
Well, how are things down there in Gallatin, Tennessee?
We are the nicest city in the United States by Reader's Digest.
Really? Reader's Digest. Is it a condensed city? Because everything they do is condensed. So I didn't know if they were...
It was in Reader's Digest and everything else, so It was hilarious.
Wow, that's pretty good.
So,
well, I want to hear your story. I'm rolling now, so I want to hear your story of...
okay.
You got a dad story?
About my dad. I have a story about my father. He was in hospice in 2007, and my aunt and uncle, his sister, lived in his childhood home. So this has a lot to do with it.
Her father is in hospice. Aunt and uncle are living in the home where the father grew up.
My family and them came to visit him, and my aunt and uncle came to visit them. And before they came, I said, please, God, please, I pray that you knock me on the head with a rubber hammer and let me know that my dad's going to heaven. And the reason why, because he was kind of a hellraiser. So I'm just going to be honest, and he was. And long story short, my aunt and uncle came, they visited, and they said, we'll come back tomorrow to see you. And I go, okay. And they went home, and my uncle smelled smoke in the cold cellar down in the basement. So he went down there to investigate, saying, where's the smoke coming from? And he starts filling in the rafters. He finds my dad's Bible, confirmation Bible from 1950, with an Irish lotto ticket. So what my grandfather, who lived in the house, must have took that Bible, hid the lotto ticket from my grandmother so he wouldn't get in trouble. So my uncle brings this Bible to me the next day, and I just melted because it went through a full cycle. Does that make sense?
I mean, that's not coincidence. I mean, that you would ask that. Yeah.
I mean, that was a big, hey, this is from 1950.
And you said, hit me over the head with a rubber hammer?
Yeah, I asked God to hit me with a rubber hammer to let me know he's going to heaven.
Okay. And then like the next day? I mean, how soon did this happen? Like very soon after?
Well, my aunt and uncle were there like on a Tuesday, and they came on a Wednesday to give me that Bible, and he passed away on Thursday. So
that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Talk about how you felt when all of a sudden they walk in, and what did they say? How did they?
They said, my uncle said, Sue, I found this. This is your dad's. And he goes, I was looking for what was burning. He smelled something burning downstairs. And he, and I looked and I went, and I started crying, and they couldn't understand why. And I explained to them. And they were just in awe. My uncle was, he's like, yeah, okay. But my aunt was pretty good about it. So
typical guy. Guys are just the worst, aren't they? Guys are just the worst.
I know.
But for him,
No,
okay.
but-
So number one, he smells smoke, goes down there, and there's no smoke.
And he doesn't find anything. There is anything, but he's filling in the rafters.
And why was he feeling up? What is he? I mean, that's crazy.
I had no idea. He just said I was starting filling in the rafters, and I found this. And they've lived in that house, I think since 1960 or 65.
And he's never reached in there before.
Never. So, and to me, this is my God incident, to a prayer that was answered. And so that's my story.
That is so beautiful. Not only that, but here's the way I kind of look at those kind of prayers being answered too, is that, so here you are praying your prayer in 2007, and it's almost like, to me, God answered it in 1950. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? You know? Because it's like he sees the timeline, he sees where you're going to be, where he's going to be, he sees the prayer, and it's like, well, let's just give Dad a little nudge to put it there, and then we'll nudge even the thick-headed guy who doesn't think anything. I mean, he doesn't even realize he was a pawn in all this. You know what I mean?
I know my grandfather. I mean, hiding that lotto ticket from my grandmother. It's just amazing that all those, that history happens. It was his confirmation Bible, and that I still have the Bible. And that was the last thing he touched. I let him hold it, that he could. And I have it by my bed at night. So I know.
That's a great story, Sue. I mean, it's just a wonderful story. It is.
Thanks.
It's absolutely wonderful.
Thanks, Trapper.
I mean, honest to gosh. See, aren't we friends now? Isn't this amazing? You listen to the podcast.
I don't share this with very many people because they nanny poo poo, but that's something that's touched me. So,
show of hands, how many people have heard nanny poo poo before? Show of hands. Few hands going up in the room. From the nicest city in America. See? Thank you so much, Sue. Sue Baker on Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God, where what's a nice girl like you? On to story number 2.
She needs to get to church, and I keep taking her car, and the car is breaking down. And
this is Katey Elizabeth. She has a car problem. She's trying to get her mom to church and all of that, and her car is falling apart, and
$4,500.
Who would do that? Who would give somebody $4,500 as a gift?
So a friend that I had known for a very long time has seen me helping people, because that's what I do. And so I see somebody, it's like Dr. Namie's wife. I can't walk past somebody and know that they're suffering, because I've seen that so much in my life. He stepped up and gifted me that money. And then CarPlay popped up immediately.
CarPlay, it allows you to play podcasts in your car.
I was like, I don't really like podcasts.
Yeah, and she doesn't really.
Kind of boring.
Yeah, well, tell me about it. Jeez, So, thanks.
It's like listening to talk radio.
Okay. Well, here's the bottom. She used to listen to podcasts, but what's happening is that everything's updating. The CarPlay is registering with her phone, Bluetooth and all that, and so they're starting to get updates on podcasts.
Jim Harold was one of them in his Paranormal podcast, and it was somehow on autoplay, and your podcast, the podcast where you had introduced the show, was on it. And it was like I had already been having, everything kind of happened all together. I had already been having issues trying to figure out how to talk to God, and understanding where I was in this gigantic marble, and why, what was wrong, where was my disconnect. I've been going to church, and I'm just like, I just don't get it. I don't get it. I felt disconnected and lost. I had done what, I guess you were talking to somebody, and I had just started listening to Blind Faith 3 or 4 days ago, because I have already listened to all of these ones, 2 or 3 times over, and I could probably start reciting them. I started to play them for other people. I'm getting in the car when I have a 5-hour trip. I'm like, we're listening to all of these. I hope you're Christian, because by the time we're done, you're probably going to be.
Okay.
So, I started to listen to those, and one of the people that we were talking to was talking about, I think it might have been on here, he's talking about how you learn your prayers, but you say them mechanically. And people would always tell me, pray, and I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, So I'm going to say some Hail Marys, some like Our Fathers, and I never really got like, I guess that spiritual injection that you get growing up. And then like I would go to church and I would listen and I didn't really get anything. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Like I'll ask God for stuff, but I don't think I'm doing it right. Like there was something to me that was like, I don't think I'm doing this right, because either I'm not listening right or I'm not hearing right. There was some disconnect in there.
You've mentioned how you kind of felt a disconnect, and you can be any age and feel that disconnect. I think you're right, because we don't know how to pray. We don't know how to carry on a conversation. We don't know how to just be.
I didn't know that you could just talk to him. Like I remember going to a woman and she was like, you just need to pray. You just, talk to your guardian angel that talks to, talk to God. Like I was just like, what? I don't understand. I just need to keep Hail Marying. Like what's going on here? Like nobody. And then when I talked to my grandmother, they're like, oh, that's how you do. Yeah. You just talk to him. I'm like, my brain didn't wrap around that something so huge and so just divine could ever want to listen to what I say. And like, why would you listen to me? Like, I don't know. Like it was just, I just didn't feel like I was worth listening to.
He loves you.
But when I started listening to the podcast, a lot of things started to make sense. I think there's a difference between going to church and having faith. That's when I started realizing that there's two things. Like I can talk to God and he's with me all the time, as opposed to he's with me for an hour at church on Sunday. And I think what was going on was he has been literally yelling at me. And I just didn't know how to listen, and it wasn't until
we don't refer to it as yelling. God's just shooting off flares. He's talking to us. He's shooting off flares, saying, "Do you see me here? Do you see me here?" And most people are kind of oblivious, but he's trying to get our attention to draw us into conversation, daily conversation. And interestingly, is that part of the story here about Katey Elizabeth is kind of an almost an argument with my wife and I. Because a few weeks back, I started mentioning people who were helping us out financially through Patreon. And I started mentioning first and last name. She said, you can't do that. You can't do that. There's privacy issues and all that. I'm going, well, they won't mind. No, you can't do that. So Katey Elizabeth was one of the very first people I just kind of sent a message to saying, hey, is it okay if I give you a shout out? And she said, yeah. And I said, how did you find us? And she said, the Paranormal Podcast. And then she talked about how until she found Touched by Heaven, and then subsequently the Blind Faith Live series, which has always been my hope, is that people come here, then go there, and they get the whole picture, is that through both of them, she feels the connection. She sees the flare gun being shot off by God. She sees God drawing her into conversation. She sees the miraculous things that have happened in her life at a certain time, and she gets it now. This is all part of the conversation, and prayer is just conversation with God. And that's what God is trying to draw us into, and a deeper relationship. And she's there now, and she understands it now. Then she started sharing other things that have happened in her life.
My mother was a heroin addict for like 20 years, 25 years. It did cause a lot of emotional distress growing up as a child. But it's like, you can tell that my mom has like a good heart. She would go out and do what she did. And then she would still be sitting at like McDonald's, and she would find the last $5 she had, and she would go and find homeless people and feed them. There was a battle, and I was watching it like front row seat. My mother has always been very devout in her faith. Now, that she was not practicing it, but she was like adamant about it. We were up in a place where she would buy her things, and I remember this clearly.
You mean her drugs or what?
Yes.
Okay.
She was I was driving the car. I was in high school. I was like 17.
And you knew your mom was a heroin addict.
I was aware of it and she's my mom. And if I didn't drive, then she would have drove, and then they would have impounded the car, and who knows when she would have come home. But when I went with her, she would come home. She had to bring me home. So in order to make sure my mother would come home, I would go. And I was driving the car that day, and my mother had found a wallet earlier laying between two vehicles. And she picked it up because somebody is my mother and her good nature. Somebody like drop a wallet standing in the hood. Somebody drop a wallet. Like, what are you doing? Yeah. She lays it on the back of the car, goes and gets her stuff, comes back. Well, she wants to go get more. Her habit was pretty bad at this point. And we go back up there. And in the process, a woman in this chinchilla coat and these high heel shoes, her and her daughter, these people swarmed my car. This woman is pulling on my door. My mom, her immediate thing was to get me out of there. She locked the door and slammed the door shut. All of a sudden, there were people all over my car.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, you're in the car?
I'm in the car, and my mother stepped out of the car, and the woman who I'm supposing that her wallet, it was her wallet, comes at my mother, because that's what this was all about. She thought my mother had taken her money because somebody had seen my mother ask about somebody dropping a wallet and losing it.
You're inside the car watching your mom get beaten up.
They were beating on my windows. They were hanging on my wiper blades, and I was watching them beat my mother. And this woman is cussing and calling me all sorts of names. And I'm just, I don't know what happened. Like, it was like, literally, you ever heard that saying, Jesus, take the wheel? I grabbed hold of the wheel, and my mother is screaming at me, go, 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 go. And I peel down the street. I mean, there are people that are breaking things off of my car. And then there was a gunshot. Back window was blown out. So my mother said he looked like he was like 13. And he had a gun.
And he was part of the
and
gang.
He pointed it at my car, and he let off rounds, and it ended up, and my mother thought I was dead. Like, the whole back window blew out of my car. I watched it fall, and God was driving that day. Had I jerked the wheel, it would have ended up in the back of my head. It ended up in the headrest of the passenger headrest. That's where the bullet landed. Had he been a better shot, or if God had not been driving the car that day, they would have ended up in my head. We got back up. The guy turns. I find this out from my mother. He turns to my mother to shoot her. Now, there is like 3 rounds now in the back of my headrest. And as we know, most of them have at least 6. He turns to shoot my mother, and the gun jams over and over again. He can't shoot her. She's curled up on the ground. She's been just beaten to a pulp. And he can't shoot her. It won't go off. It's jammed. Like, he keeps messing with it, and he can't. So what he does is he headbutts her, and they all run off. When she wakes up, everybody was gone. The next day, my mother goes into the hospital to detox. And then the oppression started. And I seen things that were impossible. Like, people, like, my mother was like bent into a pretzel. I've seen things standing like feet from me. I've heard things. We actually had a paranormal group come in at the time because we didn't know what was going on. Her voice would change. I mean, I would see my mother bent in weird positions. She would speak multiple languages. I mean, it was enough to where it was manifesting in the house around her. She was hearing people. Like, it was bad. It was like I was living in one of those movies, those terrifying horror movies. But at the time, you're thinking, there's no way this could happen to me. Like, you're going through it, and you're like, there's just that it can't be like that. Like, that's movies.
We don't realize we're on this. I always say we're on a chessboard, and we have no idea who's playing the game because most people can't see who's playing the game. But there is a game going on over our souls, and we're kind of oblivious. We're kind of veiled most of the time. If you don't get
Absolutely.
it, Lord help you. But there is, and we get the influence from the good guys and the bad guys. It's going on all around us.
It's strange because Dr. Namie, I was listening to one of the blind faith things, and it was actually like yesterday when I was coming back from the store, because for some reason, when I hook it in, my podcast will automatically start on blind faith. And he was actually talking about just this, and I'm just like, wow. It's like every episode that I have listened to has somehow had something that I could correlate with in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing. God actually delivered her from her addiction. She said she would pray to God every day. She goes, I just don't want to die, a heroin addict. And she goes, I didn't do this. She says, God did this. God saved me. And she goes, I promise you, I will go to church every day. And she does. She gets up at 7 a.m. She says prayers every morning. And she gets up and she goes to church every morning at 9 a.m. every day.
To go to mass or just to be?
She goes to mass every day.
Yeah.
Every single day. She
promised.
She says, God gave me that, and I will do as I promised. And she says, nobody is going to get between me and God.
Katey Elizabeth also mentioned another miracle regarding her mom.
At one point in time, what is it called? Hepatitis C was not curable. Like the doctors will tell you, no, you have it, that's it. 3 years ago, before the cure came out, my mother goes into the doctor and she's like, I have hepatitis C, which they have results stating that she does have it. And he goes in and he comes back and he goes, no, that's not possible. My mom's like, what are you talking about? She's like, I just need to, I want to see what these counts are or whatever. And he goes, you don't have it. And my mom's like, yes, call this doctor. He called this doctor. Yes, she has it. Well, she doesn't.
So when did it go away?
We don't know. My mom goes, well, God decided I didn't need it anymore. And he called a specialist. And the specialist goes, yeah, that doesn't just happen. And my mom goes, well, apparently it does. I mean, God was like, yeah, we're done with this. You don't need it anymore. So he took that away. It was just gone. Like the doctor even told her, he actually told her, he's like, that's a miracle. Like, this is not something that just happens. That's another one I should have been like, oh, okay, yeah, hey, here I am. But I didn't think about it.
I gave a talk to a group called Young Catholic Professionals, and I mentioned how everything you read about in the Bible, everything you read, the miracles, the apostles prayed, miracles happen. The angels were busy opening up jail cells and all kinds of stuff. Angels were busy. Some of the apostles, they couldn't kill them. They tried to kill them, and they were left for dead. Then they get up and walk away. And I said, all that stuff is still happening. It's still happening. It's just that then it was included in the writings. It was included in the church. It was part of the fabric of the church because the church was built on the miraculous. The supernatural things were all part of who God is. I mean, it's all power. It's all power. So here we are 2,000 years later, and all we're talking about is the stuff that happened 2,000 years ago, instead of how God is still doing that same stuff now. As you heard on the Blind Faith Live podcast, Dr. Namie prays, things happen. No question whatsoever. I've got hundreds of miracle stories. You hear like the Dave Jackson story, episode 1. He should be dead, but he's not. He had not yet fulfilled his purpose. He was living within that God bubble. He's still around. The angels in episode 3.
Oh, I know. I was just like, I mean, even the guy that I was with, it was my coworker, and we're listening to this going down the road, and he looks at me and he goes, what? Yeah, every single one that I have listened to has had some kind of effect and has like given me some kind of open, like it's allowed me to see. At least I'm making everybody else like listen to it with me. Like my boss, right. He's just like, can you just turn that off? No, you're listening to it. And he's like,
that's funny. That's funny. Thank you, Katey. Another nice girl meeting in a place like this called Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. Now a third story. Wait, do I hear a knock at the door? It's one of my neighbors who didn't know I did podcasting, Touched by Heaven, Blind Faith Live, none of it.
Hey, Paranormal Queen. Oh, God. That's so
She
funny.
lives, as I look out my front window here, see that house right over there? She lives on the other side of that house. And she was listening to Jim Harold's podcast.
That's so funny.
It's neighbor Nancy Hanson. And you're about what? What are you, 40 yards away? I mean, what are you here, 30?
I could spit and hit your house. That's
funny.
Well, and here's don't ever tell this to Mr. Harold.
Oh,
but
it'll be a secret.
As soon, I didn't even finish listening to his podcast. I'm like,
well, wait a minute, I'm on it.
I went straight to Touched by Heaven, and then I'm like, wait a minute, there's another one?
There's another one.
Blind Faith, and I'm like, okay, and I didn't even. I'm like,
that's funny.
So I was listening to all of the Touched by Heaven, that's when I found out that there was blind faith. So now I'm into listening to that too. That was my entire Wednesday.
Well, I should ask you. I'm going to interview you for Jim now. What is it what in particular you like about the Jim Harold Paranormal podcast?
Anything you could possibly think of that relates to ghosts.
Oh, you like the campfire show then and all that?
Yes, I love that. It just makes me think I'm not crazy for some of the stuff I've seen and I've heard. And, well, at St. Chris, we all call him the Monsignor. There's a ghost that walks around St. Chris. And I had no clue. I've been doing RCIA there for 8 years, maybe.
Teaching? You teach it over there?
Yeah, I'm on the team. Mm-hmm. And the one day I was helping out, look up and there's like this man that walked right across the way. And I'm far back, past the atrium back. And I'm like, there's a guy in here. And everything was locked down. We went after this guy and they're like, well, how tall was he? And I'm like, he was, this tall. He was wearing black, and he had black hair. And they're like, okay. And we went looking for this guy and couldn't find him. And called the cops because we're like, there's a guy in the school and we don't know where he is. We lost him. So we all get the cops in. They start looking and they go, we can't find anything. There's nobody here. And I'm like, okay. So that's when I found out, you must have seen the Monsignor. There's this person, ghost, whatever. And one of the priests was doing a, confession, closing up everything. And he heard this voice behind him say, can you help me? And he said, sure, I'll be just a minute. Turns around, there's nobody there. It was right in the middle of the church.
And that was the Monsignor also?
We think. Yeah.
Same guy? No, and why is he called the Monsignor?
Don't know. We just made it up.
Oh, this could be anything.
It could be anybody.
Oh, I see.
But this guy that I saw was totally wearing a black shirt, black pants, and he was way taller than me. And of course, I'm short, so that doesn't make a difference. He could be 5'6", and I'd still think he was tall.
But you assume he was a ghost.
Oh yeah, because we never found him. We never heard any of the doors shut, and you would be able to hear that because there was only.
Well, the reason I ask that is that now there are ghosts, which are spirits still tied to this world.
Yeah.
And we talked, and you'll find this out now that you found Blind Faith Live as well through this.
Yes, indeed.
You'll find out who ghosts actually are.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that he was just trying to make sure everything was okay.
Could be. But the reason I say that, the ghosts are actually in temporary hell. When the ghosts...
Oh, that ain't good.
Well, it's just is what it is. Yeah. People who are so attached to this world that they can't even get off this world when they die are ghosts. Okay. They don't make it to purgatory. They don't make it to heaven. They are stuck here. And it's temporary. It's not final judgment. It's just temporary, which is why you'll notice that all the ghost stories, you don't find Mother Teresa anywhere. Yeah. You don't find the best of the best generally. Yeah. Now, there are some very quiet ghosts that don't bother anybody, but ghosts are, they're in temporary hell. Wow. So you either saw that or, now we did a number of healing services in churches and things like that with Dr. Namey and everything. We mentioned that on Blind Faith Live. Right. And often Padre Pio would show up. Now, this is a saint. Yeah. But he wasn't, he's not a ghost. He was, Padre Pio, allowed to...
was he like intervening, maybe?
Oh, he was praying. I mean, he was there. I mean, he also had a number of miracles related to his prayers. And there were times when we were in healing services and more than one person would come up and say, Who's the guy in the robes and the big beads and all this kind of stuff? No way. And we're like, who? And he had a beard, and they started describing identically the same guy. It was Padre Pio. So that's why I say now in a church, who knows? Could be a ghost. Could have been a Monsignor. Could it be a saint? I don't know what the situation was. My hunch is you're probably right. It was a ghost because there's no reason for a saint just to wander through a building, making, you know what I mean? It's not like
he come to see me.
It's not like he was working the joint. You know what I mean? Padre shows up, he's working the room. You know what I mean? He's got his prayers going and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? But it just goes to, and some people don't, buy all this stuff. But is your husband tired of hearing you talk about these things?
Yes. He is
what does Jay say?
He's like, you're nuts. It's just weird things that happen.
It's interesting because there are people who have experiences more connected to, as I say, kind of the earthly things. There are those people who have the kind of the heavenly things. You might be having both. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure where to categorize this stuff just yet.
It's me. You should know that by now.
And you've how many episodes of Touched by Heaven have you listened to? Did you go all through them?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's good.
Serial listeners. I'm like, this is not enough. There needs to be more.
There needs to, and there will be.
I know.
There will
Thank
be.
God.
Yeah.
I need something to listen to.
You got over 200 blind faith lies if you want them there.
I know, and I have not made my way through all of those yet.
Oh, fun.
But I'm working.
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
All right. What else comes to mind when you look at your experiences? Anything else?
I had my aunt who passed away. She was my godmother, my sponsor for confirmation. And she was like my second mom. And I was listening to the Glenn Beck show. And he was playing, it was Christmas time, and he was playing the song called I Miss You Most at Christmas. And she just popped into my head. And I was, naturally wrapping gifts. And I was in the kitchen, and we had a little television set underneath the counter. And I'm listening to this song, and the television pops on. And I'm like, oh, that's strange.
It just popped on by itself?
By itself.
Okay.
And I'm like, all right, I probably hit it with the tube. I wasn't paying any attention because I was listening to the music. I was wrapping the gifts. And I turned it off. And then the song is still playing.
On the radio?
On the radio.
Okay.
And the television pops on again. So with this, I'm like, because I was thinking about my aunt too during this song. And I'm like, okay, Aunt Ann, if this is you, I'm turning the television set off. I want you to turn it back on again. And I turned the television off, and it came back on. After the song ended, it never, ever came back on ever again. It was just weird.
Tell me about her.
She was wonderful. She was Italian. She was would give me anything. Told me she would let me wear platforms and mini skirts, unlike my mother. She was my dad's sister, oldest sister. She was wonderful. She just loved me to death. She would give me anything I wanted, and passed away when I was 13.
So if I was to say to you, is she in heaven or this temporary hell, you would say,
oh, she's in heaven.
You're
that
sure?
Woman, oh, yeah.
The woman gave you mini skirts. Now, wait a minute. There's a lot of moms out there right now going, wait a minute. That woman's not in heaven.
No,
she gave her anything she wants.
She didn't really. She just told me if I came to live with her, she would. And I didn't.
Let's go help Nancy be a loose girl. Let's give her mini skirts. Let's give her anything she wants. Are you sure?
She had a great sense of humor.
Oh, I bet she did. Are you sure?
No, she's definitely in heaven.
Definitely in heaven.
She definitely is. Mm-hmm. She's up there probably making a mean, I don't know,
spaghetti
cocktail.
Yeah. See, now there you go again. See, your view of who's in heaven and who might be different than others.
Well,
maybe.
That's true. She could probably be in purgatory. Just waiting for me.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What else did she give you other than drinks and sleazy wear?
She just gave just tons of love.
Okay.
It really. I mean,
okay.
I've always felt loved with her.
Okay.
She was wonderful.
Very cool. Okay.
You got it.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Fun. And then, of course, I passed along your two podcasts, both the Touched by Heaven and Blind Faith, to friends of mine, one in California, one in Florida, that were Facebook friends. And I'm like, you guys got to listen to this. They're wonderful.
There you go. Neighbor Nancy. There's neighbor Nancy Hanson there. And good sound advice to share these episodes, Touched by Heaven, and as well as Blind Faith Live, Real People, Real Miracles. Thank you for that. And thank you for rating and reviewing them when you're in your app and for Apple Podcasts and things like that. So there you have it. Three nice ladies. They're all finding their way. Two of the three also finding Blind Faith Live. Maybe Sue Baker, who lives down there in that nicest city in America. Maybe she's also found Blind Faith Live now as well. Thanks for sharing all of it here at Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. And that will wrap up another episode. See how easy it is to share a story? And I bet you have one, right? Contact me at touchedbyheaven.net, touchedbyheaven.net. And do us a favor also and subscribe to the podcast. That helps get the word out. Thanks to those who are helping us out through Patreon. Nice financial support. We appreciate that. I forgot to get first and last name, so I'll do names next week, okay? But thank you for listening to Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. See you next week. I'm Trapper Jack. Show of hands, how many people have heard Nanny Nanny Poo Poo before? Few hands going up in the room.
You can tell I used to teach a long time ago with the kids.
That explains it.